I want to thank the panelists. Great testimony, very informative. And looking at the Financial Times blog, it says that in the press conference following the 15 July lease sale auction, in the press conference after the ceremony, government officials blamed the results on the current low price of oil and on the fact that many companies were learning, quote, learning the process, unquote. But it was clear that officials were deeply disheartened by the outcome. So I'm going to ask each of you, how would you interpret the results of the first public bidding event? Y'all touched on that again, but just elaborate a little bit. I'll start with Ambassador Pasquale.
Chairman, one of the critical issues is for Mexico to put its offerings on the international market on a competitive basis. The fields that they were offering were relatively small. The contract length and period of time was relatively limited, 4 years plus 2 years. Companies had given them some input that they needed a longer period of time. There were questions about the fiscal terms, and one of the challenges for Mexico is that historically they've operated on the basis of Pemex estimates of production costs, which generally have been lower than international perceptions of what costs would be. When you begin with that as a basis and you put a tax structure on top of that and you get the base wrong, then you have a real impact on the fiscal terms. And so in the end, when companies had to come back and make an assessment of what was competitive in a Mexican environment, the relatively small fields and shallow water exploration didn't make the kind of threshold for them to be able to bid in the current kind of price environment. This is an issue that we've begun discussing with the Mexican government. I think they're aware of many of the factors. They're looking carefully at what the lessons are that they could apply to the future, including the contract terms, the field sizes, the fiscal competitiveness. It's not a situation that can't be reversed. It can be dealt with, but it is an issue that points to one very fundamental point, that if you're going to succeed in this current environment, that investors are going to have to find a return on investment that is comparable or competitive with other parts of the world at a point in time when prices are low and capital expenditures are being cut.
So what I'm hearing you say, I'll follow up with something Eric said as well, but so the Mexican government really may have been disappointed in the price, but they didn't think about the factors that a private company would factor into their bid on what their production cost would be and the exploration cost. And on the other side is these weren't real attractive pieces of the puzzle. You're small areas and unsure, shallow water, unsure. But as Eric was saying, there's some more attractive leases and properties in the future coming down the pike. So that provides me with optimism, and that kind of sums it up. Dr. Tunstall, I'll give you a chance.
Just briefly, I agree with the ambassador's remarks. I have to say, though, that this first round was very much of a disappointment. Half of the blocks didn't even receive a bid at all. Now, I think part of the problem is that the Mexican government is stuck in the mindset when the legislation was passed, oil was selling for $100 a barrel. It's not anymore, and the cost structures associated with development in Mexico are even more critical than ever, because the energy companies are going to be reluctant to make an investment if they don't feel good about their ability to make money, and they've really got to push their costs down at $50 a barrel to make that happen.
Right, Doctor?
Yeah, I think this points to although I agree with those remarks in terms of the financial structure of incentives in this particular bidding. However, I think it shows, again, the argument that I made that the Mexican government intends to carefully manage this to its advantage. It wants to limit profits. It wants to carefully manage the opening. It wants to direct investment in certain ways, and I think it will prove true in the next rounds as well. They're going to try to very carefully manage that to improve and increase their revenue.
Right. Mr. Farnsworth?
Well, very quickly, just to add a couple things. If you're going to have a failure, it's best to have it on marginal properties that are relatively small and not the most attractive ones in the deep water later on. So some of this is kind of working out the kinks in a process, and I think there is a lot of learning that has to occur and is occurring already, number one. Number two, I think according to all observers, this was a process that was run openly, transparently, fairly. It was done in a way that it was intended to do. So that's a real success, because it's the first time somebody was mentioned since 1938. So there's not a lot of track record here. That's an important point, I believe. And I think the final thing that I would say is that as the auctions are going forward, some of the terms could very well be adjusted. And this is a global marketplace, and companies that they're dealing with are global operators, and there's a constant dialogue back and forth. So again, it's a bit of a learning process, and to the extent that some of these fields do come online and do begin to produce and do begin to return benefits to the Mexican people, that will then play into the idea too that there are real benefits to this in terms of the deep water, in terms of some of the other plays. Those are longer dispersing fields, and therefore the benefits to the Mexican people wouldn't accrue until later down the road, several years. And so it may have been a tactical decision to try to have a success, even knowing that not all of the fields would be purchased on the way that they wanted them to be, but nonetheless to have the opportunity to bring some of those benefits back to the Mexican people in a relatively quick time frame compared to what some of the other fields might yield.
Right. Thank you all. I'm out of time. I will say this. I was, before Congress, I was an auctioneer, and that was my business, and maybe we'll go down to Mexico and teach them a little bit about the auction business. That I'll turn to the ranking member.